listening to the Film Monsters Podcast with Nate and Ray.
Welcome, foolish mortals, to the Film Monsters Podcast. I'm your host, your ghost co-host, Nate. That was my haunted mansion intro. It's spooky season, damn it.
Well, I'm your ghoul and all things unholy co-host, Ray.
Absolutely. I had to try to set us up for that spooky season that we're finally in, and Ray and I are recording this like a day before October, and we're both getting in the zone, getting in that mindset, and I am so ready to just like spend October doing nothing but watching horror movies.
Which, it's hilarious to me because we get all excited for October as if we're not watching horror movies year round.
That's very true. Not like I haven't seen like 100 this year, if not more. So Ray has something he wants to discuss today. What is it you wanted to bring up, sir?
Well, I just wanted to bring up all things unholy. And what I wanted to talk about, so I don't know if you saw on the news, I'm sure you did, because let's be honest, we're kind of the same person, that the smiling people at the baseball games.
Yeah, which is brilliant marketing.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about these amazing marketing stunts that I haven't seen in a long time. I don't think I've seen something that like caused such an impact since like the Blair Witch Project. And I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about some of this like genius marketing for a movie that neither of us have seen, for a movie that could be great. It could suck. It could be just okay. But point is, that marketing alone makes me want to go support the movie because the genius behind it.
Oh, I completely agree. I feel like with the internet age that we live in, it's very different than what it used to be like to promote a movie. Like I remember, and I'm sure you might not know the detailed specifics of it, Ray, but there was a period of time where when David Lynch released Inland Empire, that when he was campaigning for Laura Dern's Oscar nomination, that he was sitting outside in California with a vote for Laura Dern and Inland Empire poster while he was like holding a cow on a leash. But there's been over the years, I feel like there's been a lot of really interesting people on the ground marketing campaigns for films, and because of the way that the internet is now and how you can literally go online and watch a trailer for anything, or like even if you scroll through Instagram or Facebook or anything, it's like every 5 posts from a person, you get some form of advertisement. So I always find it really respectable when production companies are like, let's do something that's more out of the norm and like do something that's gonna like bring attention to our movie. And when I was seeing photos of that, especially the one where the girl was at the baseball game and she was like getting drenched with rain, and she wasn't like putting an umbrella up or anything, and she was just staring at people like that, I was like, that takes some serious dedication.
And for those of you who aren't aware, to promote this new movie coming out called Smile, the marketing team placed actors in all these like Major League Baseball games, saying every time those like candid cameras would like look on them, they would just do this creepy smile and not be responsive at all, and that freaked people out. They even put someone in the background of Good Morning America as well.
I did not see that one, but I bet that was amazing.
Yeah, so you see the host talking, and you see the girl standing in the background just smiling directly into the shot. And like the genius behind that marketing, because it gets people talking. It's kind of like when I don't know if you remember when that really cryptic trailer for Cloverfield.
Oh yeah, I totally remember when that came out. It was like it was just enough to pique your interest, but like didn't give anything away.
And then it was kind of seeing these little like more outside the box marketing kind of reminds me back of the days of Blair Witch Project, where you know, the world. You know, I've heard so many people talk about how Blair Witch, that movie's not scary. If you rewind the clocks to 1999 and you saw the marketing, where the marketing was literally putting the faces of these people on milk cartons as they were actually missing. Just the genius behind these marketing teams. And it's so refreshing seeing that that's still going around to this day.
Oh, 100%. And I think that is, like, in my opinion, the way to get people like me excited for movies, because, like, I would much rather have something like that is more just like the generalized concept behind what the movie is than, like, what we talked about in the last episode, which is just like these elongated trailers that tell you every little bit and piece of what's going to happen in the movie. Like, I don't want that. I'd rather just have that. And then, like, thinking about what you said with Blair Witch Project, having those people out there, even though they're like paid actors, it puts this thing in the back of your mind, like, oh my God, could this be something that happens to people? Like, even though it's a fantastical concept, grounding it in reality and putting people out there that are acting like that adds more of like a terrifying nature to the movie.
Yeah, and I for one am so excited, and I hope that, you know, I'm rooting for the movie to do well, mostly because I want more things like that to happen. I want to see more fun little marketing stuff like that. I'm excited for it, and I'll check it out. I'll check out the movie eventually, but this definitely gave me a new level of respect to want to try it just because of the genius behind the marketing, for sure. And I just wanted to touch base a little bit on that because I just think it's worth mentioning that these little stunts aren't going unnoticed. In fact, it piques my interest even more when I see cryptic little things like this.
Oh, 100%. And I always respect production companies that are willing to, like, kind of go outside of the box and do something different. And this is something that's very different. But I think we'll both be more excited to go to the theater and watch this now that we've seen something so wild being done in society again to promote a movie. Like, it hypes me up way more.
Me too. I'm so excited, and I hope this isn't the end of weird, cryptic things like that. And speaking of weird,
yes,
are you ready to get weird?
Yes, I'm ready to get weird.
It's time to get weird. It is the spooky season, all things spooky and unholy. And, you know, Nate and I talked about this last weekend when we recorded, and we are here to further cement the insanity that our brain is as we discuss probably your favorite subgenre of horror, Nate. Am I mistaken to make that assumption?
It's kind of funny because, you know, before we did this episode, I was like thinking about it and you mentioned it. Doing slashers, we were talking about it, and I was like, you know, that's a genre that I really love. But in the back of my head, I didn't know like how much I loved it. And then I was compiling together my list of movies that I wanted to like quickly mention or talk about. And I was like, wow, I like a lot more of these than I realized. But I think the reason why, there's something about the settings of these films and like the way the directors approach to tell these types of stories. And what I think is interesting is the idea of the slasher film gets very generalized, and there's a lot of different types of slasher movies out there. And I think that's what I appreciate. Obviously, everyone cites John Carpenter's Halloween as like the pinnacle of slasher films. That movie was put out in the early 70s, and that's just like spawned an entire wave of slasher films. I heard someone I really respect that was talking about horror movies, and they were talking about a book that was written called Going to Pieces, which is about like the rise and fall of the slasher franchises. And it's like Halloween was created, and then you have this whole like immense amount of movies that were made over the years that were trying to formulaically copy that and do it the exact same way, while hopefully trying to add some sort of spin to it. And then when you look at the late 90s, that's when Wes Craven came and did Scream, and it completely revitalized the idea of what the slasher films could be. And then it spawned this whole new wave of like meta commentary slashers that are kind of poking fun at the genre. And so this is a really interesting group of films that we're going to talk about today, and I'm interested to hear what your experience is like with slashers too, Ray, and like what ones you're going to talk about, because I feel like this is similar to like last week when we were talking about horror as a whole. I don't think you can really, when it comes to a slasher, have a wrong answer about what fits into this category. As long as there is some form of killer, I feel like slasher fits the definition. I think there's normally this idea that there has to be some sort of like ambiguity to who the killer is or something, but I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that there's slasher movies where the killer can be revealed in like the first 2 minutes of the movie, and it's still a slasher. So I'll be really interested to hear the films you want to talk about today as well.
Well, and I also feel like, it's in the title, slasher, the only quote unquote rule, I guess, is that people get slashed.
Exactly.
I think that's just the rule of it. If people are getting slashed, and what I mean by slash, like, because I feel like you hear slasher and, oh, did they die? Like, obviously people die in horror movies, but I feel like slasher specifically has to be, there is like an art form to it. Like, you can't just put a monster movie in a slasher movie. There has to be some, again, slashing in order to be a slasher, as redundant as that may sound.
I actually wanted to start the episode off by talking about a slasher film that I think is the pinnacle of slasher films. And honestly, if you look at a lot of like real big horror movie fans, it's typically glossed over because everyone talks about Halloween and how Halloween was so impactful. And this film was incredible, and it's now been championed even like streaming on the Criterion Collection, like it's been talked about so much. And that is the film Black Christmas.
Yeah.
Black Christmas doesn't have the Halloween tone. This is a film that's set at Christmas time. And what's funny is, Ray, and I wanted to mention this to you because I'm not sure if you're aware of this information, but this film was directed by Bob Clark, who is also known for a really popular Christmas film called A Christmas Story.
Yes, I just discovered that upon doing some research for this episode.
Yeah, it's hilarious. But I truly think, like, as far as the idea of what a great slasher film can be, Black Christmas hits all those hallmarks. And what I think's interesting is everyone cites Halloween as like the pinnacle of this, but like the opening shot for Black Christmas is that POV. There's a guy sneaking into this girl's sorority house. It's shot first person, like steady cam, and you're just like in the perspective, the POV shot of the killer. And I feel like everyone always cites Carpenter's Halloween because of that intro sequence where it's like they try to shoot it in one take when Michael Myers is going up the stairs to kill his sister. But like Black Christmas did that well before that movie ever existed. And it really just kind of immediately sets the tone of like, I haven't been introduced to any characters yet. I don't know anyone in the film. I just know that there's this ominous presence that is going to cause some kind of havoc. And I think when you jump into that, especially with the contrast in the opening shot of that film, it's the sorority house beautifully decorated for Christmas time. And Christmas is like the time of year where we're always thinking about like positivity and good thoughts. And like to contrast that with something so evil and heinous as murder, it's just like it immediately in the first like 5 minutes of that film just completely uneases you.
And you have one of my favorite shots of that movie is because it takes forever to get a true reveal of the killer, and then there's that incredible scene where you see that just the killer's like bulging eyeball looking through the peephole.
Yes.
That scene haunts me to this very day.
And also, like, one of the things I feel like people don't give enough credit for, because when people talk about slasher films in general, they always say there's like throwaway characters in movies, but Olivia Hussey and Margot Kidder are like two of my favorite slasher icons in a film. They have so much personality. Their characters are so interesting, and even like the older lady that's the head of the sorority house that's always drinking. Like there's so much personality in all of these characters, and even shout out to Mr. John Saxon from the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, who shows up as the cop in this movie. There's so many amazing characters and fantastic moments in this film, and the dialogue is really witty and well done. But what I really love the most about Black Christmas is the ambiguity of the ending and how we don't really ever know 100% who the killer is. We just get little insights into their psyche because of these really disgusting phone calls that they're making that's unsettling all the people in there. And I think leaving that ambiguity just makes this movie like unsettle me even more.
Yeah, there's something so like, I don't know, just kind of grimy about it. And like you said, especially because it's taking place during Christmas time where, yeah, you have those thoughts of positivity and to have a killer on the loose. And that's the other thing is it's like our leads, I slashers tend to have I don't know, they tend to have this thing where like the cast are usually really annoying, frustrating. But I feel like on Black Christmas, because it's so early on before all these tropes became a thing, you almost get like more grounded characters that you feel for. They're not just like dumb teenagers having some sex party. Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of that, but I feel like back then that trope wasn't so cemented. So you were actually like the main character, the girl, I forget her name, the lead girl in it. She is fantastic, and you are actually like rooting for her the whole time.
So the lead character is the actress Olivia Hussey. She plays Jess, but I think she is really great, and I feel like her facial expressions and like the way that she acts to the way that she reacts to the situation really kind of puts us in her perspective. But I also think Margot Kidder's character Barbara is one of the best characters in the film, who like gets a really really rough kill in the movie, but like I love that she's like really just kind of like this intelligent but like sort of brash character. And what I really love about this too, and you just mentioned it, Ray, but like when you have a film take place in like a sorority house, I feel like a lot of times there's this idea of like, oh, all these characters are going to be ditzy idiots. And it's like all the characters in this movie are really intelligent. Like they get killed because the killer is really smart, but like the women in this movie are never just treated as like objects or like, these dumb girls that are just getting killed off. Like you really are rooting for all of them through the film, and like you want them to get out alive.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I appreciate about that. This film, I feel like it came out before that became a trope, so it's really, it makes you really root for the characters, which is way more effective trope, because I feel like once you enter like that, 80s era of slashers, you were just like, gosh, just kill these people already. But at this point in the genre, you were still like heavily rooting for them to make it.
Absolutely. And I love Black Christmas so much. I know that like a lot of people champion this film as like one of the best horror movies, and I would just recommend everybody watch it. It's so good. And before we quit talking about it, I do really want to mention quickly, they made 2 remakes of the film. They made one in 2006 and one in 2019. The 2019 one is one of the worst movies I've ever seen in my entire life.
But it's got your girl Imogen Poots in it.
Oh, I know, but it's terrible. It's like insufferable. But the 2006 Black Christmas, which was released by Dimension Films, who put out all the Scream movies, is actually really entertaining. And it provides some backstory into the killer, which I'm not always like all about that. Like I love that the original Black Christmas has that ambiguity, but I will say if you're looking for a remake of a film that's not complete garbage, that the 2006 Black Christmas remake, it's definitely not as nuanced or intelligent as the original, but it's worth watching. I would check it out if you haven't seen it. It's a lot of fun.
I haven't seen it, so I'll have to add that on the rotation.
I'm assuming it's probably streaming on Tubi or something. It's one of those movies no one wants to pay for. I mean, can you blame people for that? But no, that's. I'm glad, Ray, that you like Black Christmas as well. So, what's the first one you want to bring up?
I'm gonna jump to something more modern, because I feel like the ones I appreciate most is the ones that have smart characters that actually like are worth a damn. So I wanted to jump into a newer one, and it's a trilogy. I just want to bring up the whole trilogy while we're at it. It's the Netflix original for Fear Street.
Yeah, I actually just rewatched all the Fear Street movies recently, and I really enjoyed them quite a bit. And I agree. I think that like that is a movie that actually treats the characters as people, and like they have intellect, and they try to make intelligent decisions to like solve the issue as to what's going on, and they're really well made movies.
Oh, and some of the kills, like the kill with the bread slicer,
that is arguably to this day one of the grossest things I've ever seen in a movie. Like, hands down, it's just disgusting. I will say that my biggest disappointment in that Fear Street series is that they killed my two favorite characters off in the first movie.
Is it the girl with the bread slice?
Yes, her and
I
the
loved
guy.
her so much. I loved her so much. I was so upset when she gets killed because she was legitimately probably my favorite. Is the one shining some humanity on the group, and she is smart, she's witty, and she's just so likable. And then when that happens, like, it was like gut punching, 1000%.
Well, and I also love films that can provide like a larger commentary, especially something like a slasher, and this whole idea of Sunnyvale versus Shadyside, and how like the one town is clearly like affected by all of these murders, and like it's definitely like the people that live there are less wealthy. And I think with those two characters in general, there's this whole thing after their deaths about how like they were selling drugs or whatever. But what I love about the way that the filmmakers portray that is they were selling drugs to make enough money to go to college, and how it paints like this thing of society paints people who are involved in drugs or sometimes in sex work or things like that in a negative perspective, where they don't understand that like sometimes people choose that route in their life because it's the only route they have to choose. And I really respected that as a filmmaking choice in the film, to like portray those characters in that light and show like that idea, here's a more impoverished town put up against this really like uppity upper middle class town. And that really works with the overall like slasher plotline, and they juggle those things really well.
Yeah, so I was a big fan of it. I really also like kind of the time jump thing, that because I feel like a lot of these movies, like when there is a time jump going back in time and it's almost quote unquote a prequel, I feel like prequels have this issue where they're not as effective because you kind of already know what's going to happen in the future. But in this situation, I really enjoy the fact that they do this time jump, because it's not told through the lens of a prequel, but rather unearthing the legend of these killers as they keep going back in time. So that makes the movie more enjoyable when you watch the trilogy all over again, because you have so much information throughout all of them. So I really enjoy that, because like I said, I feel like a lot of prequels suffer from the whole like they're not as effective because you already know what's going to happen. But in this case, it's more of you learning more about this legend and going back with the characters, learning about the legend of these killers. Also super weird seeing Britta Perry from Community there.
Yes, I really love her as an actress, and she's really great. She's obviously playing someone very different. And I think what makes that so effective too, Ray, like you were just talking about, is I think I read online these movies were shot like simultaneously, back to back to back, which makes sense in the way that they're split up and how close together everything feels. But my favorite of the series is the second one.
The one in the camp?
The one that takes place in the 70s. Yeah, because it pays homage to a lot of really incredible slasher films. Obviously, I'm a huge Friday the 13th fan. I have been since I was a young kid. But what I love about that movie in general or about Fear Street, is that it pays homage to that, even with like the burlap sack over the killer's head, like Jason in Friday the 13th Part 2. But it's its own thing. And that's what I like about it. I love this whole thing about like, it's not just like this was a kid that was drowned at a camp killing people. It's like this whole idea of like witches being incorporated, and that this is just like a good kid who has been possessed by an entity. And I will say, like, slasher films in general, like normally there's something so campy and goofy about them that normally like you can have tense, scary moments, but also a lot of moments where you laugh. This movie with the kills it's relentless. And the one I'm thinking about in particular is that young kid who has the glasses on, that's in that cabin by himself.
Oh
where
my
he's
gosh.
like keeping the prison. That was like one of the most brutal. Something about, in slasher films, and I don't know if it's like just like a societal thing, but like you see these kids that are like getting into trouble and doing things they're not supposed to do, and there's something about that like makes it funnier when they get killed off. But like in this movie, it's like that kid is just like this innocent, nice kid who is just trying to like play a game at his camp, and he gets brutally murdered. And there's something about that that's just like so vicious and intense. Like it shook me up every time I've seen it.
It's crazy to me that this is an R.L. Stein adaptation.
Oh, I agree. I think it's wild. Shout out R.L. Stein. He's from Ohio. I love R.L. Stein. But
Wait, so Jack Black lives in Ohio?
Yes, Jack Black lives in Ohio. No, it's crazy to me that you say that too, because I never read any of the Fear Street books. I just heard about them kind of in passing. And what's interesting to me about the whole Fear Street like series and the idea behind them is this whole thing of like they're gauged more towards like middle adolescent to like, you know, early 20s, I guess. And the violence in all three of these films does not hold back. And I think that they do a really good job of balancing the stories. And I love that we get introduced to all those other characters, like the girl who killed all of her friends at that party that sings the song, like the little kid with the bat, like all of those characters that are introduced that we don't necessarily dive super heavy into their backstories. And I don't think you necessarily have to. They just come across as really creepy.
Personally, really love the atmosphere that the third movie sets.
Yes, agreed.
Especially the commentary that it's making on the way they view females and homosexuality. And back then, you know, obviously that was a huge no-no. And then these girls are tried like they're witches, even though they're just two girls trying to figure out who they are. And the fact that we are kind of shown this image of what that time was like and how, you know, sometimes it's not simply just a killer, there are other monsters, but society, you know, in its own.
Yes, completely. I love that about the whole third film. And I love, like, obviously this filmmaker's inspired by a lot of different era of horror, and I love a film being set in that time period. The time jump back to the present is a little jarring in that movie, because like the whole beginning, it takes place in that time period, and then it's like, you gotta finish in the present day, which took me by surprise the first time I watched it. I think I was a little more like cool with it the second time around. But the scene in that movie that gets me is when they go into the church and everybody's eyes are like ripped out. That's like one of the creepiest scenes in recent memory. Just like, oh, that whole thing with that minister, it's so freaky.
Shout out again to another movie that's not trying to just put on these rosy lenses of what the 70s or 90s were like, but, you know, actually more of like a grimy, gross era. I feel like, I mean, and no offense to Stranger Things, because I do enjoy Stranger Things a lot, but I feel like Stranger Things kind of gave us these like graduation goggles where we think, oh, that era was the best, but, you know, a lot of these other movies, they show us how like truly awful people were back then, and I don't know if I would say that those are the best eras, you know what I mean?
Oh, 100%. We oftentimes put on these goggles, especially like the older generation, is like, this time period was better. We lived in a better time period. You just don't understand because you weren't around then. And I think what people fail to realize is like there's problems with every era. And like, even though we live in what now would arguably be considered a more open-minded and accepting culture, we are still far away from being an open-minded and accepting culture. And so I love movies that can paint those eras as flawed and that there's issues in it, because it's like you said, Stranger Things is guilty, I feel like, of really glorifying the 1980s in a way that's like, you put the nostalgia glasses on almost. Not to say that that's a bad thing. I enjoy Stranger Things, but I do like that this movie kind of is willing to poke at that a little bit.
Yeah, for 1000%. I feel like when these movies came out, everyone was talking about it, and it just kind of died out, so I wanted to kind of drag them back out and remind people these are really good. They are fun slashers with something to say, which that's always a great balance.
Exactly, and I think that comes guilty too, which this is probably a larger conversation for a different podcast that I know Ray and I will probably want to talk about someday, but the idea of like physical media versus like digital releasing. And I think that a lot of times with Netflix original, I mean, I think it's even guilty of like someone who I love more than anything, Mike Flanagan. You see series like Midnight Mass and Haunting of Hill House and stuff, they've gotten like minimal physical releases, but like they get dumped onto a streaming platform, people watch them, and because there's 800,000 other things to choose from streaming, tomorrow they forget they even watched it. And so great movies like this that are really entertaining and really well made get glossed over because it's like, yeah, I watched them one night on Netflix, but like I don't remember it because there's 80 million more movies to watch on Netflix. I think these films, if they would have been released in a theater or had a wider release like that, they probably would have been really well received.
Oh yeah, in fact, it took me a while for me to even check them out because they were just on a weekend dump of movies, and they just kind of sat there for me until I finally saw them, earlier this year. And yeah, I really enjoyed all three of them.
Yeah, they're really enjoyable. Next on my list, I was going to jump back in time, but I think now I'm going to sit in more modern time just to kind of be there with Ray and what he was talking about. And I want to talk about one of my favorite modern day slashers that pays homage to some of the greats while also being its own brilliant, self-aware comedy, and that is James Wan's *Malignant*. I truly 100% wholeheartedly believe that this is a genius work of film. I think the people that came out and were like, wait a minute, that took a turn, and it's funny, and it's over the top, and it's ridiculous, and it's like, do you not understand that James Wan has proved himself for the past however many years, even from as early as like Dead Silence, which is not a film that everybody loves, but is so well made and atmospheric. You look at the Conjuring series, you look at Insidious, you look at the first Saw film, like the man is incredibly competent and he knows what he's doing. And people like acted like he was dumb and didn't know how to make this movie. And no, all of it is very self-aware, and it very much pays homage to different eras in horror history.
Yeah, I was almost, because I'll be honest, the first time I watched it, I too was a little, thrown off because I wasn't sure what to expect, especially with the really campy reveal of when you find out what it really is, and then some of those special effects, which are great, but they're meant to look a little over the top and a little bizarre. And yeah, like, I'm not gonna lie, I had to think about this movie for a little bit. I was like, I don't know how I feel about this. And then the more I thought about it, the more I realized, oh, okay, I get it. I saw a quote from James Wan where he said that he wanted this movie to feel like that movie that you went to the video store and you found it sitting on the shelf by itself, just kind of collecting dust, and you had no clue what it was, and you rented it on a whim, and it was this like outrageous, bizarre experience that you were only able to have if you took that risk.
It's funny, when I watch the movie, and I think it's because of what you said at the beginning of the episode, I'm like a huge horror movie or a slasher fan, like big time. And so when I'm watching the movie, I'm getting all these like giallo influences and like really heavy-handed, like goofy 80s like slasher films. And so like when the reveal happened, in my opinion, I was like, okay, this is no different than like a reveal in like a Frank Henenlotter movie in the 80s. Like, this doesn't surprise me because I saw a lot of people, which this is another movie I put on my list, so I can just briefly mention Frank Henenlotter's Basket Case is a film that a lot of people reference when they talk about this movie because of like this whole idea of like dueling identities, and like the whole idea behind Basket Case is these two twin brothers who are Siamese twins separated at birth. One of them's just like the deformed like creature, and when the reveal happened in that movie, that's where my mind jumped to, and I was like, James Wan is just someone who appreciates that era of filmmaking and wanted to do it in his own way, and I respect the hell out of him for it, because one of the things about it is he never stops taking himself seriously. And that's one of the things, is like, you could get to a point in this movie where you'd quit taking it seriously and it would come across as kind of like, I don't know, jaded, or like he doesn't care as much. But the actors are always playing into the camp from like the beginning of the film, and everybody is taking the film so seriously. And I think that's why it hit so hard for me, is like no one stops giving 100% to the material, and you can feel it through all of their performances.
Well, and then you have the whole like conversation of, are we as audience taking ourselves way too seriously? Have we forgotten how to just have fun with the film? Because I feel like this film is meant to be just like a fun film. It's not meant to like reinvent the wheel. This is James Wan saying, you know what, like, I want to do something fun, something that I would have enjoyed watching. And that's exactly what he did. But I feel like as an audience, we've reached this point where we carry ourselves so seriously that we don't understand camp anymore.
Well, I think even on top of that, I think one of the things that general audiences don't understand is how to juggle tonality. And I think people will watch a trailer, and when they watch a trailer, they're like, okay, I'm going in to watch this type of movie. And then they get in and the director tries to change it up. And they're like, well, this isn't the type of movie that I thought it was going to be. And in the 1970s and the 80s, directors didn't give a shit about that. They just made what they wanted. And I have a hell of a lot more respect for filmmakers that will take a risk and try to do something more over the top. And the thing is, like, on top of, Malignant being kind of goofy and having its more ridiculous moments, like, the cinematography in the film is breathtaking. Like, it's incredibly well shot. It's very moody and atmospheric. The score is incredible. For me, as someone who loves horror films and slasher films, like, this obviously pays that homage to that Giallo era. You have a gloved killer that's killing with a very unique weapon. I thought, like, I left the theater and I looked at Jess and I was like, this is the type of movies I want to be made. I want to be surprised. I want to not know what a filmmaker is going to do. Because I've seen James Wan at his peak. I've seen The Conjuring. I've seen Insidious. I know the man can make a really great horror film. But this to me was like, this is a guy who had a passion for something. He made it and he did it effortlessly. Like, it's just incredible.
Right, and I do really admire that because he could have easily hemmed it up and made a movie that was audience pleasing, but you can tell this is him as like mad scientist James Wan. I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to make the movie that I would want to see. And I feel like those movies, whether you like them or don't, they are the more impactful ones because it truly is the vision of the director.
And I don't know if you know this, Ray. I thought it was really interesting. James Wan is actually married to the actress who played like the police analyst in it.
Oh.
That was good, and she co-wrote the script with him. So clearly, like, the two of them have a really like big passion for like 80s horror. One of my favorite moments when I sort of had an idea when I was getting into the film that like this wasn't going to be what I expected, when that actress had the most incredible line delivery at the beginning of the film, when it was like Gabriel was having his freak out at the beginning and she's like, it's time that we cut out the cancer. And I was like, yes, this is what I want. This is like schlock in the best way possible. And we always complain, I feel like, especially the horror community, we don't get movies that feel like that era anymore. Malignant felt like a 1980s horror film. 100%.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that movie could have easily fit in that era, without a doubt.
And there's so many great, creepy moments, too. Like, I think really, in particular, the woman who we later come to find out has more of an integral part in the story that we think, that runs the tours underneath the town. When she's in that, like, empty shaft underneath the city by herself and the lights all go out, I was like, this is James Wan. He knows how to instill fear in his audience. And I love that, like, despite the movie having that really over-the-top prison fight sequence at the end that I adore, probably one of my favorite sequences in a film in years, that he can still use that subtlety and that nuance in the scares. And that scene in particular really freaked me out.
Now you got me wanting to rewatch Malignant.
It's a comfort movie for me, actually. I could watch Malignant 100 times and never get sick of it. So that's all I'm going to say about Malignant. Ray, you go ahead and mention your next film. But if you're out there and you haven't watched Malignant, just go watch it blind. It's amazing.
So the next one I wanted to bring up, this one is by no means a perfect movie. There are issues to be had with it, but I do feel like it ultimately lends itself to being just like a gory movie that if you don't think too hard about it, you will have a good time with it. It's actually a Shudder original, and it's called Random Acts of Violence.
I have actually not seen this movie, so you'll have to enlighten me. I haven't even heard of it.
Random Acts of Violence. So the only reason why I heard about this movie is because Wade McNeil from Alexisonfire, oddly enough, scored this movie.
Ooh, Jay Baruchel.
Yeah.
I love Jay Baruchel. I'm all about this.
Yeah, and then so you have Alexisonfire and Jay Baruchel, coming together. So this movie is essentially like Jesse Williams. He plays a comic book writer who is headed to like a convention, and he's trying to find inspiration on how to finish his comic book series. And as he's going on this trip, a bunch of grisly murders start happening in this town. And he soon realizes that the murders are inspired by his comic book. So like the comic book character in his movie is a slasher. I mean, not in his movie, on his book series is a slasher. And he is killing people mimicking the different comic book kills that this writer wrote.
That sounds absolutely fascinating, and I 100% want to see that. That sounds like something I'd really enjoy.
And don't get me wrong, definitely you have that low budget vibe. And there's some issues to be had, like the third act gets a little, like it doesn't know what to be there towards the third act, but it's a fun movie with a lot of really brutal kills. That's the thing about this one, is definitely, you stay for the kills. Some of those kills are pretty gnarly, for sure.
And that's something I can respect.
Yeah, and some of them are really creative kills. And yeah, I mean, it's no Halloween Kills level of killings, but they're good.
I honestly, like, I pulled this up on Letterboxd and was taking a peek at it, and like, this is 100% a movie I could see myself really enjoying. So the fact it's on Shudder and I've never seen it, I definitely am going to jump on and watch this movie. I also, like, Jay Baruchel is someone I followed over the years, and like, I really respect like the projects that he chooses to work on. Like, he was in this incredible TV show called Man Seeking Woman that was like so hysterical, and it was really like kind of tongue-in-cheek, playing into like winking at the camera. Like, each episode was super surreal, and I honestly, like, if he wrote that, just knowing like the comedic background he comes from and the way that he is in his movies, I imagine that even if it didn't get perfect reviews and it's not like a perfect movie, it's probably still something I will end up loving.
And you'll love the score, and it's a really great score. So if you ever like, I actually picked it up. Dine Alone Records pressed it on vinyl, and it's a great score. I really enjoy it. But yeah, I mean, I won't get too into it since you haven't seen it. I don't want to spoil anything. But a low budget, like throwback 80s type of killing movie with some really cool kills, like some very creative kills. It feels weird sometimes gushing about kills, like, oh yeah, that kill was awesome. Like, that doesn't make me sound like a psychopath at all.
No, but I think that you're 100% allowed to say that the kills are awesome, because at the end of the day, it's a movie, and nobody actually got hurt. No one actually got hurt. And I think that's like, that plays into the conversation that we had last week about like the horror community and the way people are in the horror community. Like, no one actually gets hurt. It's just entertainment, and that's fine.
Again, we do not sound like psychopaths at all.
We're both psychopaths, so like, legitimately, it doesn't really matter. But my next movie, Ray, that I wanted to bring up is actually a film that has probably one of my favorite scores ever. It's truly like just absolutely brilliant. I wish I owned a copy of this. Mondo actually put it out a while back, and it's completely sold out. I'm gonna try to track down a copy at some point. But that is the 1980 William Lustig directed film Maniac.
Oh, okay, yeah, the one where he scalps people.
Yes, I had never seen this movie for the longest time because so many people were like, "Oh, that movie's just disgusting. It's gross. It doesn't. There's no artistic value in it." And of course, as per usual, I come to find that those people are all wrong. The movie is simply about a guy who is a killer, and the great part about this movie is with the character, he's played by Joe Spinell, gives probably one of the most terrifying performances ever. The opening scene is him like murdering this couple on a beach, and it's shot in a way that, like, obviously it's shot on 35 millimeter. It's got that like really like grainy feel, but it's almost shot documentary-esque, which makes you really feel like you're watching something that you should not be seeing. And so he goes around scalping his victims, and he staples the scalps to mannequin heads, and he like talks to them like they're people, and it's truly like disturbing. But what's really interesting is the movie looks into his psyche as to like his trauma and like what has triggered him to get this way. And about the halfway point in the movie, he meets this photographer, Anna, who you start to get the idea that she's gonna like get him out of this and that he's not gonna be this way anymore. But I think we all know as the audience members, like for a psychopath, that's not gonna be the case. And it's just really brilliant. The score by Jay Chataway is one of the best like 80s synth score. The practical effects in this movie are done by Mr. Tom Savini, who I know you respect quite a bit, Ray. And Tom Savini actually makes a cameo in this movie, and his head blows up. And so he does the blow up of his own head as the visual effects. And it's just amazing. I could praise this movie all day long. It's really one of the most unique films of a serial killer that I've ever watched. This movie is violent. It is unrelenting. So like if you're not really into a film that like depicts really over-the-top acts of violence, this probably isn't one that you're going to be able to handle, but it is really well done and really well shot. And also, if you enjoy that, you should watch the recent remake with Elijah Wood, which is equally as amazing of a movie.
I was just gonna ask, isn't there a remake? And isn't it like a lot of POV shots with that one?
Yes, it's actually shot mostly through POV, and one of the things I really respected about it, especially Elijah Wood's performance, is very different than Joe Spinell's performance, and I respect that. And it also dives a lot more into the relationship that the character had with his mother, which I think kind of brings out the emotion of the film even more. I love them both. I think they're both, I gave both of those movies 5 stars. I think that they're both really well done and both exist in an environment on their own, and I think they're both worth watching. And I think the Elijah Wood remake is streaming on Tubi right now, Ray, so you could watch that there. But I would recommend watching the 1980s one first. Typically it's streaming on Shudder during the spooky season, so you'll probably be able to find it there.
Well, we're on the topic of Tom Savini and amazing slashers that don't get enough love. I mean, we've talked about this before, but I mean, come on, I have to keep giving The Prowler some love.
Oh, dude. So it's funny that you just mentioned The Prowler, because I watched The Prowler like days after you watched it, and I really enjoyed it a lot. I don't think it's a perfect movie, but I really enjoyed the setup of the kills, and I think better than even like the character dynamics in this film, which not all the characters are perfect, like some of them are all right, but this film bleeds atmosphere in every way. Like, I love that, like, empty dormitory setting where they're, like, running through the staircases and stuff. There's something about that feels so, like, relatable, like a place that we've all been in, and, like, even, like, an old hotel that feels like it's empty, like, when you're on vacation or something. Like, I don't know, there's something about that movie that, like, just the atmosphere and the killer's creepy look with, like, the military uniform, but his face is completely covered, that's just so haunting to me.
And let's not forget those kills.
Oh, dude, the kills. The best kill I have ever seen in a movie is probably in The Prowler. And that is the scene where the guy gets stabbed through the head and his eyes like slowly like roll in the back of his head and white out. And I was thinking when I was watching it, I was like, how in the hell did they even pull this off? Like, it was insane.
Yeah, when I watched that, it was like, you know, I've seen plenty of horror movies. I've seen plenty of brutal kills, but that one made me cringe to my very core.
Oh God, I'm the exact same way. I was watching it and I was like shivering just how grossed out I was. But also, like, I think what I love about that movie is you talked about the score, and the score is really amazing in that film. But what's interesting is when the kills happen, I feel like, especially in that scene in particular, the score kind of quiets down a little bit, where it's just like, it kind of gets you to a point where you're just sitting with it and just being disturbed by that imagery.
Yeah, I feel like it does take a backseat, but for the better of the movie, because I do feel like it just adds that, you know, ominous mood to it. That honestly, slashers are very well known for, because it's not something supernatural. Often it's not something supernatural or something, that's kind of frightening thing about slashers, is that these could be real things that happen for the most part, and kind of pulling that safety net away from you and adding this like creepy mood to it. I wasn't going to talk about this movie, and I'm not. I just want to bring up a nice quote from Summer of '84, where he's like, even serial killers live next door to somebody, so it's like the very dread that my next door neighbor could be a serial killer, or it could be someone like on The Prowler where it's someone you're close to. And that's kind of the eeriest thing about these horror movies, that, often it's someone you knew who it was all along and you just couldn't face it at the time.
Exactly. And that's, I love that about the slasher genre. I think it's so cool because each film is so different. Like, you can get a film that, like, the slasher entity ends up just being that, simply that. Like, Jason Voorhees in the Friday the 13th franchise is a killer. He was a kid that was drowned by camp counselors. Most of these people, they just know him because he's, like, part of this lore. Or, like, even Michael Myers in Halloween, or Freddy Krueger. Like, it's this lore of this entity that's been built up larger than life. But then you have a film like The Prowler where it ends up being a guy that everybody in town knows. And there's something about, like, the polar opposites of that spectrum, that it's like, when you watch these films, it can really be anything.
Right. And that's something that I love, that I do think slashers have a leg up on a lot of horror. It's more realistic. Like, slashers are more probable to be true stories than a vampire or a zombie.
Absolutely. And I actually, in my next film I wanted to bring up, I want to talk about a movie that is an absolute classic, probably one of my favorite slasher films ever made. And it's one that, Ray, if this spooky season, if you've not seen it yet, I recommend heavily that you watch it. It streamed on the Criterion Channel last year. It was on Shudder, and that is the 1982 Amy Holden Jones classic, The Slumber Party Massacre.
Oh, I've heard you talk about this one.
Yes, I've talked about it on the podcast before when we were talking about summer horror movies, so I won't go into elongated detail, but one of the things that I find so interesting about this film, similar what to Ray said about the Fear Street trilogy, which is like looking at like the time period through a specific perspective or anything, this is a slasher film directed by a woman, which I feel like in the 1980s, Ray, I don't know, with your knowledge and my knowledge, I can't think of a whole lot of horror films in the 80s directed by women. So you get like this slasher film that is like normally through the perspective of men, which it's like the women are very highly sexualized and, they're getting killed in these really absurd ways while they're having sex with like the high school jocks. But what I love about the Slumber Party Massacre, you get the overly comedic killer who's in like a Canadian tuxedo. He's wearing all denim. It's a jean jacket and jeans with like work boots on, and he carries a drill. And the drill is incredibly phallic. And the dialogue that he has towards the women, which I find so interesting because we live in the culture that has already been through like Me Too and like watching women come out about their traumatic experiences. All of his dialogue in the film is like very much like, you want this, you don't want to tell me no, like all this stuff. And I was thinking, like, for the 1980s, when this was something that like was glazed over and not talked about at all, like this was incredibly poignant for that time period. And what I love about the film is there's only two guys in the whole movie other than the killer, and they're like the guys who are like creeping in on the girls while they're in their slumber party. But the thing is, they're portrayed as feeble in the movie. They're the ones who are like scared and making stupid decisions. The girls in the movie are the ones who are like really kind of like taking action and being intelligent. And that's what I loved about this film, is like the women are all portrayed as really intelligent and really powerful. And there's like even the scenes in there, it's not like they're sitting around talking about boys. They're talking about the baseball game from the night before. And it's like, it portrays them as human beings. And that's what I love so much about the movie. On top of it being just a really atmospheric and incredible slasher film, it has a larger social commentary. But one of my favorite scenes is they order a pizza and the killer like drills the pizza guy's eyes out and he falls down, and one of the girls at the party moves the dead body and opens the pizza box and starts eating the pizza, and all the girls like look at her and she's like, "What? I was hungry." And so it also has that really great balance of comedy as well. But it truly, like, I showed it to Jess the first time last year and she was like, "Why is this movie so good?" And I was like, it shouldn't be that good, but it is that good. And it's just like, it's one of the most iconic films that like just kind of transcends everything that exists about slasher films. And it's like an hour and 20-minute runtime. It's super brisk, but I feel like, Ray, you and I pretty much, I feel like when it comes to horror films, we fall in a very similar vein on the things that we enjoy. I feel like this is one you're going to watch and go, dude, Nate, how did it take me so long to see this? I loved it.
I'm going to have to look it up then. Yeah, that sounds ridiculous in the best of ways.
And that's exactly right. Ridiculous. The fact that the guy's murder weapon is a giant phallic drill that it's always shown like coming down through his pants. It's wonderful. It's great. So what do you got for me next, Ray? I'm ready.
Well, so like I said, this genre is more of your wheelhouse. You have the upper hand in this genre, but there's one more that I wanted to bring up. And this one, I feel like it's one of the more unusual slashers. I say unusual because I don't think people, when they hear slashers, they think of a musical.
Oh, what are we talking about here?
I think you know.
Are we talking about Sweeney Todd?
I believe we are. We're talking about Mr. Johnny Depp in his Oscar, nominated performance of Sweeney Todd.
Yeah, Sweeney Todd, I've seen it once. It was a couple years ago. And it was really interesting to me to see something that's so popularized that does combine the slasher genre with a musical. And I think that it's really well executed. And the music in it is all really great.
With the man that wrote I Feel Pretty.
I know, absolutely hysterical. But I mean, if you think about it, Mr. John Waters, who created some of the most disturbing films ever made Hairspray. So we do have people that are all over the place when it comes to the types of films that they make.
Oh, R.I.P. Mr. Stephen Sondheim. We also got a very young and very young Vecna, before Vecna.
Oh yeah. Before pre-Vecna.
Pre-Vecna. I love Sweeney Todd. I went and saw that movie thinking, I'm not the biggest nerd when it comes to musicals. I do appreciate them, but I don't know enough of them. And I was like, what is this going to be like? This is supposedly a horror movie, but also a musical. And it was great. I love that movie so much. I think it's obviously Tim Burton, so very, very fake blood. The blood is very fake. But the performance of Johnny Depp as this kind of deranged serial killer that he wants to kill one person specifically, but he figures in the meantime he'll just like, in his words, practice on less honorable throats. And, he's just going to turn these corpses into meat pies, So there's some cannibalism there too. And this is all written by the same guy that wrote I Feel Pretty.
Exactly. And you gotta respect being able to jump out of your wheelhouse and make something like that. And yeah, I feel like all the characters in Sweeney Todd are really like charismatic and funny, and obviously Johnny Depp has a ridiculous personality. And I think that it really works and shines through in that film in particular. It's so much fun to watch him just kind of like go completely unhinged. And it's an entertaining time. I really enjoy that movie a lot.
Also, just a little side note, they just announced a Broadway production coming to New York, and guess who got casted to play Sweeney Todd? Mr. Josh Groban.
Oh my God, that'll be a wild experience. That's insane.
So yeah, I would be remiss if I didn't bring up. I mean, there's all the classics, obviously, that we haven't talked about, but I feel like they go without saying. But I feel like when people think slashers, they don't think of Mr. Johnny Depp and Helena Bonham Carter dancing around and singing while slitting people's throats.
Oh, 100%. And I think that's important what you said now, Ray, because like, I mean, when you look at slashers, like, I'm a huge Nightmare on Elm Street, Child's Play, Scream. Like, I love all of the franchises, and those are some of my favorites. But I feel like typically when Ray and I do these episodes, we try to highlight things that aren't just like, hey, we're going to gush about things that people already love, and we're going to try to get people to watch things that they may not have thought to watch beforehand. And, like, don't get me wrong, like, Child's Play 2 is one of my favorite slasher films ever made. Like, I think that it's perfect. But, like, I'd rather spend my time talking about the films that we've talked about now. And right now, like, Ray said that he discussed his last one. I had a huge list, and I think I know which one I want to talk about as my last one. I mentioned when we were talking about Malignant that I'm a huge fan of Giallo films, and I love Mr. Dario Argento, and I've been working my way through Dario Argento's catalog, and last year I watched my favorite Dario Argento film, and that is Tenebrae.
I have not. I need to watch more Argento. I feel like when it comes to Argento, I have so very little knowledge.
Yeah, so Tenebrae is about a guy who's a writer who he goes to Rome, and he's being stalked by a serial killer who's murdering all of the people who are associated with his book that's coming out in ways that are showed in his book. And so he's wondering like how these people even get like the information as to like what's in his book, how are they getting murdered, like why is this occurring. And the film has some of the greatest slasher sequences, like kill scenes, that I've ever seen in a movie. And one of the things about Argento is he's incredible at set pieces, and he always seems to find a way to like create this feeling where like you can put yourself in any of these characters' situations and sort of understand what it would be like to have to try and like flee from these type of killers. And it's just so amazing. And this movie is an incredible mystery that's not easy to solve. And when the reveal happens at the end, your jaw will just be on the floor. I could not believe it, like when they revealed who the killer was at the end. And I think that's one of the best things about Argento, and one of the things I want to talk about with why I love Dario Argento so much. And Ray, I'm not sure how familiar you are with this, but I'm sure this will be something you appreciate. We talk a lot of times on this podcast about like, you know, the importance of like just people in general and how much we love people and respect people of all backgrounds. And like, you know, Ray was raised out of the country, didn't even speak English till he moved here. And one of the things I love about Dario Argento, and he's very vocal about this, is when he casts films, he doesn't care where you're from. You can be from any country, you can be from any place in the world. He just wants to see how you're going to act in a scene, because wherever the movie gets distributed to, it's going to be dubbed. And I know for some people that can be really difficult to watch. I'm someone who, like, when a film comes from a specific place, like I've been watching a lot of Korean films lately, and I watch a lot of films from China and Japan, and I always love watching them in their original language with subtitles. I think that it makes it a lot more impactful, because sometimes the dubbed vocals are really cheesy. But there's something about Argento and knowing that he like respects cultures and people so much that it's so much less about, I don't care if you speak the same language as everyone else, I just care that you're a great actor. And I think that's so cool that exists throughout the history of his filmography. And that's there was a movie that came out that I mentioned last year called Drive My Car, which had a similar thing where they were doing the stage performance in the movie that every person spoke a different language, and the way that they got it down was they would do table reads, and all of them would do it in their own language. And when they were done with their line read, they'd hit the table to let the next actor who didn't speak their language to know that it was time to speak. And when people came to see the stage performance, they had like a huge screen in the background that had the languages of everyone that was coming to see the show. And I think that like inclusivity, especially in that way, is so important and so awesome, that like in the history of horror, that someone like Argento, who's existed this long and has like made these movies for years, that he's able to incorporate people from all backgrounds and all walks of life in his movies. And I could rave about Argento for an entire episode, but Tenebrae is one of my favorites in his catalog, and it's streaming on Shudder. If you have not seen it, it is one of the most brilliant slashers I've ever seen, and Ray, you will love it. I know that for a fact. Also has a brilliant score. Brilliant.
All hail Argento.
Yeah. Have you seen any Argento?
I think I started watching Phenomena, and I made it about halfway through it, and then something came up that I had to leave, so I never finished it.
So comically enough, Phenomena is my least favorite Argento movie that I have seen so far. Honestly, it was like compared to the other films in his catalog, it's kind of messy. That's the one with Donald Pleasance where he has a monkey butler.
With Jennifer Connelly with the psychic powers.
Which
right? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But it's all over the place. That's my problem with that movie, is it's like all over the place. It felt like Argento was like, I want to make the most this, and that was like tail end of when Argento was making really great movies, and when he started to get into what I would call his flop era, where he made a whole lot of crap. But like Tenebrae, Suspiria, Opera, Deep Red, like they're all classics. Definitely. Those movies are all amazing. Opera is wild. But yeah, so that's the last slasher film I will include. But I do want to end this conversation really quickly, Ray, with something just fun. So I know you're not as into the slashers as I am, but I just really quickly want to ask you, of the major slasher franchises, which one would you say is your favorite?
The major, I know that's like a super basic answer, but probably Halloween. I just feel like between the kills, and I know some of them are dumb, but because Halloween takes place on actual Halloween, it just gets me in that mood. So I know it's a basic answer, but from the majors, Halloween, just because it's puts me in that mood of like the pumpkins, the costumes, the trick-or-treating, especially like having grown up in a country where they didn't really celebrate Halloween, being able to see it so lively depicted on the screen it's really cool. It gets me really excited about the season.
Yeah, I would say the original Halloween and possibly like Halloween 3 are movies that really get me in that mood, and then everything past that is kind of crap. I rewatched. I've gone through the franchises recently, and believe it or not, Halloween is probably my least favorite, just because John Carpenter's is a classic. Halloween 2 is pretty good. Halloween 3 is great. It's its own thing. But past that, they kind of just like tank. It's like they ran out of ideas really quickly. Where I feel like a lot of them are a lot of the other slasher franchises are a lot better. Believe it or not, Nightmare on Elm Street used to be my favorite. And I still love Freddy Krueger. He's probably my favorite slasher icon. But in rewatching pretty much all the major franchises in the past 3 years, my favorite slasher franchise is Child's Play.
Interesting. I could have sworn you were going to say that the favorite was Elm Street.
Yeah, so Elm Street, my entire childhood was my favorite, and Jess and I actually just rewatched all of them. And I would say through the fourth film, they're all really amazing. And then Wes Craven's New Nightmare is really great. But like the later sequels, 5, 6, and the remake, they're all so bad. Whereas like Child's Play, one of the things I give a lot of credit to is Don Mancini, the guy who writes all the Child's Play films, has worked on them the entire time that the series has existed, and they are the most consistent. They're always really well written. They're always super suspenseful, and like when he would do a new idea like Seed of Chucky, where it's like a familial comedy with like really dark violence in it, it's so unique and incredible how he's able to balance all of those tones. And the two most recent ones, Cult of Chucky and Curse of Chucky, are both just incredible horror films. And he's someone who really gets the genre. And like, I would champion anyone out there who has not sat through the Child's Play franchise because they're like, oh, it's just a killer doll. I promise you, it is like legitimately one of the best horror franchises that has ever existed. And yeah, I'm gonna say Child's Play. It's my favorite of the major franchises. And I'm sure there's people out there that all have different opinions, so you should hop over to the Film Monsters Podcast Instagram and let Ray and I know what is your favorite slasher franchise. We'd love to hear what your favorites are, and maybe if you reach out to us, we'll mention some of you guys' favorites on the next episode.
Yeah, do it up. We're excited to kick things off with a little slashy goodness.
Absolutely, because there's nothing like, going into your shower after a long day of work and letting the water run over you and then get stabbed 65 times in the back to die with chocolate syrup running down your drain.
Which, by the way, shout out to Psycho.
Yeah, shout out to Psycho. Did you know that was chocolate syrup that they used for the blood?
I did. That was awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the coolest thing ever. Psycho is amazing. And actually, a fun factoid that not a lot of people might know, but Psycho has 3 sequels, and they're all really entertaining.
And it has Janet Leigh, who gave birth to Jamie Lee Curtis. So
absolutely. And did you know that Anthony Perkins worked heavily on all 3 of the Psycho sequels?
Oh, I knew he was in it. I just didn't realize he was so involved.
Yeah, and they're all great. It's one of those things. I feel like that's one where people are like, "Oh my god, like I'm not gonna watch the Psycho sequels. Why would I ever waste my time?" And they're all really entertaining. Just don't watch the Gus Van Sant remake where they thought it would be a good idea to cast Vince Vaughn. Like, I don't get that. Sorry. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, but it is legitimately like a shot-for-shot remake with just horrible actors.
Which is so weird because Vince Vaughn has proven himself to be so competent in recent years. Between Brawl in Cell Block 99 or Dragged Across Concrete. Like, he's great. I don't know what.
And speaking of slashers, he was in a really amazing one that came out in 2020 called Freaky. That was like a Freaky Friday body swap comedy where he played like a slasher, like a Jason Voorhees type of slasher, and he switched bodies with a teenage girl. So he had to like act like a teenage girl was trapped inside his body, and he's this big slasher. It was hilarious. I really enjoyed it.
That's amazing. I have to watch that.
You would absolutely love it. It was so much fun. But yeah, let Ray and I know what your favorite slasher films are. And before we get into talking about what we watched this week, I just really quickly wanted to say that we're in October by the time this episode's released. So if you haven't, you're falling behind. But for Ray and I, that we're about to go into October, we're about to start the 31 Wax Hauntings Challenge over on Instagram. And Ray's going to hit you guys up with a little bit more information onto that right now.
Yeah, so we put together a little challenge. It's a multimedia challenge, so if you're not a record collector, that's fine. Throw up a movie, throw up a CD, a book. If you're a book collector, I know there's a lot of people out there that love collecting their books. And, just if you want to throw in like a little memorabilia and action figure, go ahead. Have fun with it. We're agents of chaos here. We're not defined by rules. But also make sure to use our hashtag 31 Wax Hauntings, as well as, tag the Film Monsters podcast on your post. We want to see your posts. We want to be notified in real time so we can share some of these posts, and hopefully we hear some cool stories, some cool anecdotes that you have with these categories. And yeah, we are also still doing that giveaway. Make sure that you're following us there too on the Film Monsters podcast, so you can get the deets on that as well. I am highly considering sweetening the pod, but I just got to see how much interest there is out there.
Yeah, we'll see how many people are are hyped up for it. I know I'm hyped up for it, Ray. It was funny because I know you put it together, but I had a fun time just reading through the different categories. I thought you did a really nice job of picking up different things that are super unique, and I'll be interested to read, especially there's some really great things in there about finding your white whale and artists you wish were still around, stuff like that. I'll be really interested to hear different people's opinions and ideas as to what their favorites in those categories are.
And hit us up with those quotes. We've had someone guess all 30 of them right, so hit us up. I'm excited to see if anybody else can figure out where the quotes came from, which should be pretty easy. It's Horror 101, most of them.
Here's Johnny, my favorite quote from Nightmare Before Christmas.
Yeah, didn't Palpatine say it?
Please, don't hurt me. Ah! I'm sorry, I had to make Palpatine. Yes, hit me.
Before we sign out, I gotta know what have you been checking out this week?
What have I been watching this week? Well, I've watched a lot of things this week as per usual, but I will say that I watched a really interesting folk horror film on Hulu called You Are Not My Mother that was really great. I feel like it was I think it came out at TIFF in 2021, and then it was released just directly on Hulu this year. But it was a story of this young girl who was living at home with her mother and her grandmother, and her mother is kind of always sort of semi out of it. She doesn't seem like she's all together. And at one point she disappears and comes back, and as the title says, you spend most of the movie trying to decipher whether or not this is actually the young girl's mom or not. And it was really good. It was very atmospheric. It was very well shot. It was just really incredible, and I really enjoyed it. And then the second movie I watched this week was I watched the Netflix original film Do Revenge, which was the worst piece of crap I've seen all year long, and I wish I could get my 2 hours of my life back.
I feel like you constantly say that it's the worst piece of crap you've seen, but I feel like here in a couple of weeks you'll tell me you saw another one that's the worst piece of crap.
Honestly, this year has been a really good year of movies. Looking at my list of worst movies of the year, there's only 12 on that list, which I've watched. My Letterboxd says I've watched 270 movies this year. So I would say if I've only seen 12 really bad ones out of 270 movies I've watched this year, that's pretty good. So what have you been watching, Ray?
Well, they can't all be Firestarter.
Oh, I don't even that word just came out of your mouth, and I don't even know how to respond to that right now. I honestly, fuck that movie.
So the first one I watched, and this is more of a rewatch, but I have never seen the extended cut for the 2013 Evil Dead remake.
Oh, you got the 4K in finally?
I got the 4K in, and I watched the unrated version, and it's only like 5 minutes longer. It's not that big of a deal. It's just basically more gratuitous gore, basically.
Which is perfect, and I will honestly, I will fight until the very end of time to continue to say that is one of the best horror remakes ever made.
1,000%. There's actually a lot of cool... I was actually mostly excited about all of the special features, because there's a lot of like featurettes about the making of the film and some of the stuff that they did on the film that I, for one, was super excited to hear about and to see the vision that Fede Alvarez had and how they, the biggest draw that the producers and especially Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi had is that there was no Ash character. They actually really enjoyed the fact that there was no Ash character and this is a new generation. And yeah, it was just a really cool, all the featurettes were really cool. I really enjoyed it. And like I said, the extended cut is, as far as story-wise, there isn't much to it. It's just more gore.
It's funny too. I actually was reading online. I'm in a lot of forums on Reddit, and I'm in an Evil Dead forum online. And what I find interesting, Ray, and as someone like yourself who's a huge Evil Dead fan, I'd be curious as to what you think about this. But a lot of Evil Dead fans don't consider that a remake. They consider it more of a spiritual sequel, which I thought was actually a really cool thought process to have. Because as we've talked about with remakes before, I think my favorite thing about the Fede Alvarez version is that rather than it just be a generic copy and paste of Sam Raimi's Evil Dead, it's trying to do so much more with all of the messaging behind like drug addiction and how like the possession in that film can really be paralleled to our lead character's drug addiction and the struggles that she had. I think it's really its own brilliant thing, and that's something I truly respect the hell out of with that movie.
So interestingly enough that you should say that it's a spiritual movie, like a spiritual sequel. Bruce Campbell actually said something really interesting on one of the special features, because they're talking about the design of the Book of the Dead, and they talk about how like when they designed it, they purposely wanted to make the book look like it had been through different set of hands. So it's like if you look at the design of the book, you can tell that it has all these ancient writings, but there's also modern writings, and then there's like bloodstains, then there's like more modern takes on the book, almost like it's been handed down from hand to hand. Like this isn't an isolated event, it's happened before. So Bruce Campbell said, I wouldn't put it past people to link that the story of Ash and the story of Mia are two separate stories happening in the same universe at two different places in time, because the book has just been passed down from generation to generation, and this is just a new generation that found the book, just like Ash's group found the book as well in the cabin.
I also want to say that one of the things about the presentation of the Necronomicon in that movie is that the whole thing of it like being wrapped in a trash bag with barbed wire around it, I think that really just kind of like immediately shows you as the audience member, like, this thing is evil and you should not touch it.
Right. So that was one. And the other one that I actually watched throughout the week, the Jeffrey Dahmer Netflix original show that they just released.
And what are your thoughts on it? Because I've heard a lot of mixed reviews.
Okay, so here are my thoughts. It's a very well-made show. It's got great cinematography. It's got very like good directing and phenomenal acting. Like Evan Peters really poured himself into this character. I do see the dangers of these shows almost like glorifying these serial killers, and Dahmer never glorifies it. They actually did something really cool where the story's told a lot through the victim's perspective. For a show about a serial killer, there's not a whole lot of like gratuitous gore. I think they did that out of respect for the victims, but they do show enough that I can see how this show would be upsetting to people. And there's actually an episode where they kind of address that Jeffrey Dahmer had fans that would send them letters and would tell him how much they loved him and how much they admired him. Don't get me wrong, I am all for these series telling these stories, My only concern comes down to like people that almost glamorize that, like to get so into these characters that like, you know, we don't need to give more fame to Jeffrey Dahmer. But, you know, I see the complaints and I see what people are upset about. But if I'm looking at this series objectively through the lens of this is a piece of filmmaking, it's great. It's phenomenal. I mean, if we want to get into the moral quandaries of this existing, that's a whole nother discussion. But as far as the acting, the atmosphere, all of the technical aspects of it, the writing, I mean, Ryan Murphy did a great job at it. And here's something you might appreciate. 4 out of the 10 episodes are directed by someone by the name of Jennifer Lynch.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, Jennifer Lynch, daughter of Nathan's best friend, David Lynch.
That is really amazing. Honestly, I really can appreciate that 100%.
So from the standpoint of competent filmmaking, it's great. I loved it. I loved every second of it. It was gripping. It was very thought-provoking. I loved it. But I can see once you enter the moral quandaries of, is this a dangerous show to have? That's an entirely different discussion. But if I'm, like I said, if I'm looking at it objectively from a filmmaking perspective, I loved it. It was great.
I think that it opens up a really larger question too of like, at this point, when you get people that are like really up in arms about things like that being conveyed, it's like, okay, well then, as far as art in general, what is okay to portray? Because everyone goes through difficulties in their life. Everybody goes through something rough, and obviously like family members that have been murdered by a serial killer, that's a different story. It's much more intense, but also it's something that happened several years ago. And I think a lot of it is about artistic intent. Like I think about the film a couple years ago that was released called My Friend Dahmer, which I honestly thought that it was really fascinating because it was much more about like Jeffrey Dahmer's upbringing as a child and less about like his reign of terror as like a serial killer. And I get like I talked about Ray about this before the podcast, but I watched Room again, the A24 film, and the thing I loved about that movie is the guy who committed that act against that woman and her son was a real person. But the movie doesn't spend its time glorifying or glamorizing that guy. It's all about the victim's perspective. And I think that it's all about artistic intent. I think that you do have to take into mind that a lot of this stuff, it's real people. Similarly to a lot of the qualms people are having with the new Marilyn Monroe movie that just dropped on Netflix, which I'm still going to watch because I love Ana de Armas, and I'm interested to see it because at the end of the day, like people complaining like, oh, it's not completely accurate, it's this, that, and the other. I don't really care about that as much, more about like the filmmaking and the artistic intent. I do think that, you know, there's a lot of people who have said the Marilyn Monroe documentary is incredibly mean-spirited towards Marilyn Monroe, which I'm sure I'll be able to pick up on when I watch the film, but I don't know. It's art. I'm always interested to see people's perspective, and obviously if you're more sensitive to that subject matter, you just don't have to watch it.
And ultimately, the last thing I want to add to that is that, like, I know a lot of people don't like it when some of these characters are humanized, and because everyone thinks Jeffrey Dahmer, they think this, like, you know, psycho monster, and I mean, the things that he did were monstrous, and yeah, obviously there was a lot of evil that came through him, but I mean, at the end of the day, these are people with real backgrounds, real stories that, yeah, you don't want to humanize them because you don't want to sympathize with a serial killer. But like I said, ultimately, he was a real human being that had some bad stuff happen in his life. I'm not saying anything of what he did is justified by it, but it is interesting seeing the psychology of a serial killer. And like I said, from the purely storytelling, filmmaking standpoint, I loved it. It was fantastic. But again, if you're sensitive to that subject, if this is something that... honestly, if you're just going to sit there and glorify and become obsessed with Jeffrey Dahmer, it's like, maybe don't do it. But if you can look at it objectively through the lens of filmmaking, I highly recommend it.
Well, then I am definitely going to check that out 100%. I'm always fascinated in the idea of stuff about serial killers, and so I'm definitely going to check that out. But yeah, that was what Ray and I have been watching this week. We've obviously been watching a lot of stuff. We always love discussing that. And I really quickly just want to say that next week on our spooky season episode that we're going to continue on, we're going to be talking about zombies. No one's going to guess what film Ray's going to talk about.
I'll keep you on the edge of your seat.
Yes, 100%. But no, we love doing this. We're having a lot of fun discussing things about the spooky season, and we look forward to getting these episodes out. As we said before, with the contest going on and everything, please follow us over at the Film Monsters Podcast on Instagram. Ray is going to keep everybody updated about the challenge, what's going on. We'll probably, I know on my personal Instagram, I'll probably check the hashtag every day, send some people some comments, thank them for participating. I'm looking forward to doing that, and you can also follow Ray and I at our personal Instagrams, Analog C for Ray, My Exit Unfair for myself, and we're excited to participate in this, to have some discussion, and hopefully get some more people joining in the conversation. We're looking forward to having more people hop on board with the podcast, and hopefully get some really great recommendations for the spooky season. And as always, Ray and I appreciate you so much for listening, and have a great rest of your day.
And remember, we all go a little mad sometimes.